Hello, today we are talking about plyometric foundations, how to get higher hops and bigger bounds. We're going to be jumping around a little bit today. See what I did there? We're going to be jumping around a little bit today between sort of some different theories and facets of science. We'll go from biology to, we're going to take a stop over here with some physics. And yeah, let's get going. So looking at Newton's 3 laws of motion. So starting off with inertia, an object at rest tends to stay at rest. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. So why plyometrics help us move better is because even though we might be moving in the opposite direction, going downward when really we want to go up, it could be argued that an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So as we're going downward, the most natural path according to physics might be that we keep moving, and in that case it would be to move upward. So just kind of an oddball thought, or a way to look at it is, why we might have an advantage in jumping up higher by actually going down first. Number 2, the rate of change in velocity of an object is proportional to the force acting on it. So the harder we go down, potentially the harder we might come up, right? The more energy put into an object, the more velocity you might get out of it. So as we are more aggressive on the way down, we may get bigger output coming up. And action and reaction, law number 3. As an object exerts force on another, pardon the misspelling there, the second object exerts an equal and opposite force on the first. So as we go down in the ground, however much force we're putting into the ground puts that much force back into us. And we're able to combine those forces and propel ourselves upward, right? So just something to think about while we're discussing all of these other factors today. What are plyometrics? Drills are activities linking optimal strength and speed. We're going to utilize the stretch shortening cycle, which we'll dive into shortly. And examples would be walking, running, jumping, I don't know, clapping your hands, whatever it is. So that stretch shortening cycle is a huge part of it, and we'll get into that now. So the stretch shortening cycle, let's dissect this just a little bit here. So our starting position here, there's really no action going on. And then in phase 1, we're going to go into that lengthening, that eccentric phase. And what are we lengthening? We'll take a look at the quads here. The quads are going to get lengthened. The glutes are going to get lengthened. That lower back, some of the erectors are going to get lengthened there. And I'm going to keep thinking about lengthening as we move to that next picture. I'm just going to borrow, okay, the calves and the Achilles are getting lengthened there. The hamstrings are getting lengthened there. So there's quite a bit of lengthening there. And then that load or amortization phase, that's essentially when the neurological processes are going to occur that are going to kind of provide us with an extra boost. We're going to have a neurological advantage because of all this stretching and force that's occurred during the stretching, the eccentric phase. And then with the firing or concentric phase, then we get to capitalize on that force. So be thinking a little bit about the physics that we went over, some of Newton's laws. Be thinking about this eccentric loading and that force that's going on these muscles in the way that it is. And so that's a plyometric benefit. And this individual, there's a very good chance that this individual is going to jump higher than they would if they just started out on the ground, because they have added additional force, right? Going back to our physics lesson, we remember that the higher force put into an object, the more force that object has to put back into the original force, right? Whether that's the floor or maybe a basketball. You know, I like those dude perfect videos where these guys, they go to the Grand Canyon and they throw basketballs like, I don't know, a couple thousand feet over the cliff, and they try to hit a basketball hoop that's like super far away. Maybe it's not a couple thousand feet, but it's several hundred feet. And then they miss and the basketball bounces and it bounces back up, 200 feet, or it just pops because it can't handle the pressure, that kind of thing. So just remember that as we add more force, there's going to be a sweet spot. There's going to be sort of a Goldilocks point where we're getting enough force that it allows us to produce more force. And then obviously maybe jumping off of a roof would be too much, that we're not going to then have some incredible jump off the ground. We're probably just going to crumple and get like a mouthful of dirt. So keep in mind, keep thinking about that stretch shortening cycle that we just went through. And what we had the phase one, we had the eccentric phase, the stretch of the agonist muscle. So whatever muscles are going to be working, those are our agonist muscles. And the physiological event there is that elastic energy is stored in a series elastic component. Muscle spindles are stimulated. So be thinking back to muscle spindles. Think back to basically our first discussion where we had our anatomy review, and I've borrowed some slides from that slideshow, and that we'll have up here shortly, so we can get a reminder. But start thinking about that a little bit. Is that now it's starting to come full circle as things we talked about basically at the beginning of the program, we're now getting to refer back to. For that amortization phase, that's phase two. There should be a little bit of a pause between phases. And what it's saying is that type 1A afferent nerves synapse with alpha motor neurons. Alpha motor neurons transmit signals to agonist muscle group. Do we need to remember that? Probably not. What would probably better serve us is just remembering that that's when that's when the neurological processes are occurring. And just remember, amortization, that's when the muscles are going to get called on and challenged to fire. So we probably don't need to memorize the physiological event in that one. And I didn't have it memorized, and as soon as I'm done reading it, I'm probably going to let it go. And then that final phase is where the individual who on our previous slide was coming out of that bottom position on the floor, and they're getting ready to jump. So now all those muscles that we lengthen and we add a lot of force to, now they are on the back end of that. And remember, an equal or opposite reaction to the force applied, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So now, because the combination of the physics and the physiology, now that plyometric action is allowing us to have a big jump. And so what's really going to happen is elastic energy is released from the series elastic component. Alpha motor neurons stimulate the agonist muscle group. So we forcefully stretch some muscles, and then our nervous system helps us recruit additional muscles and fire them intensely. And just to bring back a little bit of a reminder, because what we're doing with plyometrics is we're basically, hacking, or we're taking advantage of our nervous system. And so this is an opportunity for us not to necessarily grow bigger muscles or change our technique or work on a whole bunch of form of jumping. This is just a chance to basically get our nervous system to fire a little bit better. And one of the ways that we do that is that we're going to create this myelin sheath. So we're going to lay down this fatty substance along the axons of our neurons, and that is going to allow the nerve signal. So if the nerve signal gets passed from this nerve instead of, taking like the normal routes like that, it gets like these little speed boosts because it'll basically skip right over that myelin sheath, and so these little points in here are called the nodes of Ranvier. And you can see them better. They're better labeled on this image. I wanted to show you that last image because it's kind of a callback, and I pulled that image from our earlier anatomy presentation from early in the program. But this image is actually a little bit better when it comes to maybe like number 4 is the node of Ranvier. So now all of a sudden, that's just a little spot that nerve signal, that nerve impulse is just going to touch on before it gets kind of a speed boost to the next node of Ranvier. And that allows us to do a better job of passing that nerve impulse at a faster rate. So we can actually speed up our nervous system. So just like when we're born, if somebody says peanut butter and, we don't really think anything. We're just like drooling on ourselves. But as we age and we eat, a couple thousand peanut butter and jelly sandwiches throughout our childhood, when someone says peanut butter and, you automatically think jelly. And that's because in your brain, the nerves between, maybe peanut butter's over here and jelly's over here. Well, there's a big myelin sheath going on there. Those are really strongly connected. And the same thing, if we start jumping more regularly and perform these plyometrics, then the muscles that are involved in triple extension and jumping are going to have a stronger neurological connection to the brain, and we're going to be able to call on them and challenge them and perform at a higher level. And again, just be thinking about that this is a nervous system. Plyometrics are based on capitalizing on your nervous system. And what's actually happening a lot of times with plyometrics and the stretch shortening cycle is that it's occurring faster than normal, because it's actually not even wasting time, going from your muscles up to your brain. So if we think about maybe being at the doctor, or sometimes you bump your knee on a table and you kind of like kick funny, well, that's because a nerve is being activated and stimulated, and that muscle spindle is going to fire. And when that muscle spindle fires, it sends a signal up to the spinal column, and your spinal column doesn't always send it up to the brain. Sometimes the first thing it does is it sends a message back down to the muscle that says, fire, contract. And so that's why we have a reflex. What we're really doing is exhibiting reflexes that cause us to have muscle contractions. And that's going to save us time. That's going to help us be able to react better and more quickly and produce more force if we're training properly. So first thing is a signal from our stretch receptor, our muscle spindles. That's going to be an afferent impulse. So that's going to be going up away from the body is how I remember it. Afferent, away from the body. So up to the spinal cord. And then an efferent impulse is going to come back. And what is it going to do? It's going to cause contraction of the stretch muscle. And it's also going to, what we're also getting is dampened. We're getting a dampened impulse to the antagonist muscle. So if I've got muscles firing really hard to cause triple extension, and the opposing muscles are relaxed, it's going to cause a more violent and successful act of triple extension. So this is somebody put up a video of a stairway in New York where there's one stair, and the stairs are very uniform, and then there's one stair that's just a little bit higher. And so they just sat and watched with a camera, and they just watched people just trip on the same stair over and over and over again. And if you're watching, yeah, everybody pretty much saves their own hide. There's a lot of close calls there. But why are we able to, catch ourselves so quickly? Just remember that nerve signal, when we catch our foot on that stair, that nerve signal is actually to pick up our foot and put it forward and to react like that. That nerve signal is actually not even making its way up to our brain. It's going up to our spinal column and then turning around and coming back down and acting to save ourselves. So you trip over something enough times, and you're actually going to start to have some benefit there. And it's just part of the reflexes and the stretch shortening cycle that are occurring really naturally. So sometimes we need to learn it, and sometimes we don't. So I remember being in grad school, and I was reading a paper on something that had to do with eccentrics, but I read something about disseparated cats. And I wanted to know what, I had never seen that word, decerebrated cats. What's a decerebrated cat? Well, what it is, unfortunately, what they do is they go in and they basically trim the brain from the body. And so that cat that's on this, that cat, you can't really see the footage, is pretty crummy. But what they put a little harness on the cat. And what's happening is that all the running that cat is doing right now is all coming from pre-programmed patterns that are in their spinal column. So it's actually not the brain producing this little run on this little, kitten treadmill that it's on, but it's from the spinal column. So when we're thinking about plyometrics and some of the reflex actions that's going on, I just want you guys to remember that we have our spinal columns have some abilities to perform, basically. So be thinking about that cat. I've seen them do similar things with mice. It's kind of a terrible experiment, but it's science and it's taught us something. So I feel bad for the cat, but that's just kind of how it is. So now that we've looked at some of those things and we've broken down some of the anatomy and the physiology, I just wanted to run through this slide again and get another look and see if we think anything different now. Here's our starting position, and muscles are at resting length. Here's the force coming down into our muscles, and the agonist muscles, the muscles that are going to be causing us to jump, are getting eccentrically loaded. And be thinking about all of the neurological processes that are going on now. And we were talking about like alpha neurons and other things, but really I just want you to be thinking that afferent nerve signal is going up to the spinal column, and then that spinal column is sending a message back down, telling the agonist muscles to contract and the antagonist muscles to relax. It's dampening the antagonist muscles contraction. And then what we get out of that is hopefully a big jump. Finally, that big concentric phase. So with our plyometrics, be thinking about the phosphagen system. This is about as short of an activity as we can basically create. And what we want to do is, train appropriately. So if we're going to do plyometrics, you can do plyometrics for conditioning and in high volumes for exhaustion. And that might help you burn calories, that might help you build muscle, but is that going to boost your performance, or is that going to lead you to be jumping higher as quickly? That's arguable. You know, maybe you could say, yeah, if the athlete is overweight and they're doing, you know, sort of these like P90X workouts, and they're doing these boot camp workouts and they're roasting themselves and they get lighter, they should be able to jump higher. And that's a good argument. Or you could say, you know, by exhausting the muscle and stressing the muscle out, the muscle is going to be stimulated and the adaptation will make that muscle stronger and possibly larger. Okay, that's another argument. But if you want to take the most direct route from performing plyometric exercises to being more explosive and more powerful, it would be my advice that we're going to kind of stick to that top range of time, maybe dive a little bit further into it, but basically sticking to very short periods of effort that are surviving, basically being fueled on the phosphagen system. I'm going to pull a quote down here. According to Dr. Pat Davidson, research shows that the ability to enhance the phosphagen system's percentage of energy contribution does not increase much, if at all, through training. My takeaway is that the volume of max effort activity in training does not have to be high. If we're not altering the energy system much, do what is needed to develop the nervous system and nothing more. So as Dr. Pat Davidson says, there's not a big ceiling. You know, we can't really raise the ceiling too much on our phosphagen system. You know, we can add a little bit through training. You can extend the window through which it exists. So if you watch a deconditioned person sprint, their quick, powerful steps last a few seconds. If you take a world-class athlete sprint and watch them sprint, their top quality steps are going to last up to 20 seconds. But you're talking about like a 10 to 15 second improvement, which is monumental when you're talking about a few seconds compared to maybe 20 seconds. But really, it's not that big of a change. And we don't do that great of a job of adding storage to it. So, like Dr. Davidson says, do what is needed to do to develop the nervous system and nothing more. So if we've already got our phosphagen system pretty much created. You know, we come with a pretty good foundation. There's not the biggest chance for changing our physiology when it comes to the phosphagen system, but we can take that phosphagen system that we do have, those energy stores, and if we tap into our nervous system and create a better nervous system that helps us utilize what phosphagen we do have, that's sort of where our goals overlap with reality. And I put some links in there as well if anybody wants to follow up on that. And I'm going to jump back a few slides here. Oh, man. Here we go. Never mind. I did it. I put it where I wanted it to. So when we're talking about so if we understand that plyometrics and our ability to become more explosive and more powerful, and again, this is different from, there's work capacity and there's conditioning and there's all those other things. But what we're talking about is our plyometric ability, our ability to be powerful or explosive. So whether that's hitting a golf ball or a short sprint or an Olympic lift, these are all plyometric activities. So if we take a look at, let's see here. If we take a look at Steph Curry, before he pops up to jump, what does he do? He drops down into this little squat here, and he's eccentrically loading all of his antagonist muscles that will help with triple extension. And then he goes into triple extension later on over here. And what's Michelle Wie doing? Well, eventually she wants to, you know, smack that ball however far she hits it, I have no idea. I understand she's tall and she's good at her sport. I'm not sure where she is in her career right now, but she's probably hitting it in the upper twos or low threes back when she was, or whenever she was doing well. But what does she do first? She eccentrically loads the muscles that are going to have and be agonists in producing force. So even though her movement is very different from our other triple extension activities, what she's doing is really the same. She has a little plyometric activity on her way to what she really wants to be doing, which is hitting a golf ball. And then she's going to follow through. And what do we see over here? We see 1, 2, 3, triple extension. And how long does that take? I don't know, 2 seconds. I forgot to Google how long a golf swing takes, but maybe it's 1 second, maybe it's a half a second. So in that little half a second, she's using her nervous system and a little bit of her phosphagen, right? So I want to put this slide in here for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to talk about our motor neurons. So remember that we have of our muscle fibers here, excuse me. Excuse me. Woof. Of our muscle fibers here, while there's multiple muscle fibers in there, there's fewer motor neurons because a single motor neuron can innervate quite a few muscle fibers. Oof. I'm a mess, guys. I'm sneezing like crazy. Got a hair in my eye. All right. I think I'm good there. Sorry about that. So while there's so many muscle fibers within a given muscle, there's fewer motor neurons. And of the motor neurons that are active, of the motor neurons that there are, not all of them are active. So if you recall when we were talking about potentiation, we're going to type that one out. Potentiation and post-activation potentiation. So potentiation or post-activation potentiation. So remember that when we lift really heavy weights, we're already using certain motor neurons, but sometimes by lifting really heavy weights, instead of just having a couple of motor neurons firing, we can actually sometimes grab an additional motor neuron or maybe 2, additional motor neurons within that same muscle fiber. So that's why sometimes if we do a heavy squat, if we do a vertical jump and then we do a heavy squat and we go back to the vertical jump, sometimes we'll actually jump higher than we did originally, even though we've done work and in theory we should be fatigued because that nervous system is getting activated. So with plyometrics, we may activate those additional motor neurons, but what we're going to do, if you think back to our myelination and the strengthening of connections like peanut butter and jelly, or peanut butter and then you say jelly, if we think back to strengthening our neural connections, plyometrics, when we're calling on more motor neurons, plyometrics may not activate those additional motor neurons, but if our motor neurons are activated and then we do plyometrics, potentially we could reinforce the connection between the brain and those new motor neurons. And then if you're activating new motor neurons regularly, they could become motor neurons that are regularly activated. And then you haven't grown new muscles, but you just be using more muscle that you already have. And that would allow you to become not only stronger, but more powerful as well. And then because we've talked about muscles and the nervous system, one thing I didn't want to leave out today was our tendons and ligaments. So if you look at this, meaty muscle right here, and then it becomes this white tendinous tissue. What you have in that white tendinous tissue is a low blood supply. And plyometrics are short, powerful activities, and they're going to stress tendons and they're going to stress ligaments. Well, how do you strengthen tendons and ligaments? Heavy lifting and explosive lifting is going to be traumatic and will probably have some sort of positive adaptation. But if you wanted to have a gentler way or a more sure way of increasing the health and the strength and basically the vitality of your tendons and ligaments, it would be almost the opposite of plyometrics. It would be sort of low intensity, high volume activity. All right, so let's take a look at this here. Probably didn't need to annotate that, but I'm kind of on a big annotation roll today, so I'm just going with it. While the work you do for your muscles will provide some conditioning for the tendons and ligaments, it will be less efficient than a workout designed specifically for these tissues. The program that will let you achieve your desired result will involve flexion, a high number of reps with minimal resistance. And then Dr. Paulos explains, as you exercise and stress the joint, the ligament will respond by being stretched. The more stretched, the more it will respond by laying down cells and collagen, making it stronger. And so the idea here is that you might be doing sort of an atypical workout. So we already discussed the facility and the organization, Westside Barbell. Well, they know this about tendons and ligaments. So they will spend a lot of time training their nervous system. They will train their muscles, but they will also do activities that are have a high range of motion. So they involve flexion, and then they will do high volume with minimal resistance. And the goal there is sort of recovery work for the muscles, but also to actually help strengthen and thicken tendons and ligaments. So that's not, I say that's related to plyometrics because it's sort of the opposite of plyometrics, but it's going to help us stay healthy so that we can perform plyometrics. And what are our benefits of plyometrics? Well, we can sort of use plyometrics to isolate some of the most traumatic and violent movements that we're going to do on a regular basis, especially for non-athletes. Plyometrics is the most athletic and fast that they're going to move on a regular basis. And then it's also just going to boost performance. So it's going to improve our rate of force development. So again, when we lay down that myelin sheath and we're speeding up our nervous system, that's going to help your rate of force development, because when you decide that to perform an activity or to lift a weight, you've already laid the groundwork for a nervous system that will be performing at a higher level. And then having explosive strength, yeah, hopefully we are improving our nervous system and growing our access to more muscle fibers and growing the strength of our muscle fibers. And as long as those muscles are healthy and our tendons and ligaments are healthy, we're going to be able to produce explosive strength. We will get into this more on our activity days, but what we're going to be looking at with jumping is there's ways to progress it. So a jump would be basically anything where you're landing on 2 feet, whether you're jumping off of 2 feet or jumping off of 1 foot. A bound would be one foot from one foot to the other foot. So left to right or right to left. A hop would be, left foot to left foot or right foot to right foot. And a jop would be 2 feet to 1 foot. And if you think about what we just went through, jump, bound, hop, jop, those become less and less stable on the landing as you go from one to the next. So we're going from stable to less stable. The directional emphasis how you would progress it would be linear, so straightforward, to lateral, to rotational, and vertical is less stressful than horizontal. So just jumping up and coming back down, there's less shearing forces and opportunities for injury than there is when we start doing, like, say, maybe a vertical jump versus a broad jump, which moves forward. And on the execution, a non or no counter movement. So think about a jump with your hands on maybe you're standing underneath a basketball hoop and you're trying to jump up and touch the net or touch the rim. So a non-counter movement would be, maybe holding your hands over your head the whole time and not swinging them. A counter movement would be, maybe starting with the hands high, and then as you lower yourself, you lower your hands, and as you come back up, you throw your hands upward. So that's a counter movement. A DC would be a double contact. So on the lowering phase, on the eccentric lowering phase, the feet would actually get picked up and you'd hit twice. Or if you were jumping, if it was a horizontal movement and you're jumping forward, when you land, you'd sort of do a double tap and then you'd go again. And the idea there is that you're going to destabilize it, and you're also going to give an opportunity to add additional eccentric forces. And then continuous would be one into the next, into the next. Unloaded versus loaded, so body weight versus maybe having a weight vest or having weights in the hands or having some sort of band resistance. Maybe that's around your hips or around your shoulders. And low impact versus high impact. So our image today of our stretch shortening cycle included the athlete stepping off of a plyometric box and down and jumping up higher. Well, low impact, that would be sort of like doing that activity on the floor. And then the next step would be maybe doing it off of a plyo box. And then if you were being kind of silly, you might be stepping off of a roof, and that would probably be a little bit too much. But I heard an Olympian, Derek Kress, tell stories about his an Olympic lifter back in the 80s, and telling stories about using depth drops, which would be like stepping off of a box and then landing in a good squat pattern. And someone mistranslated a Russian text, and so instead of being like 3 feet off the ground, they were like 3 meters off the ground, which is like not over 9 feet. So it's close to the height of a basketball rim. And they were doing depth drops from that. So he said there's a few people that didn't make it through that workout. What factors are going to be affecting the intensity of lower body plyometrics? Points of contact. So as we go from, bilateral to unilateral, the stability that's going to be needed is going to skyrocket. There's going to be increased chances for exposing maybe unstable joints and increased chances for strains and injuries. Just because you're doing plyometrics and jumps does not mean that you're always jumping as high as you possibly can, or you're always landing as hard as you can. It's okay to have teaching sessions. It's okay to have practice sessions. It's okay to have progressive overload, right? So just like with our strength training, Not everything is always done to a maximal intensity or maximal volume. So that has to do a little bit more with your intent or your effort. And then sort of, piggybacking off of that little thought is the height of the drill. So the force of the landing, right? So the greater the force is, that gives opportunities for more stimulation and more growth, but also means that it gives us a chance to be progressive and strategic about the use of plyometrics. And then also keep in mind body weight. Now, plyometrics are pretty self-limiting. So a bigger or thicker individual is a lot of times going to, I'm thinking about maybe a drill where they are going to jump over something. That bigger, thicker athlete may know ahead of time that the individual who's 100 pounds lighter than them, who barely made it over that object, is maybe it's not the right call for them. But I've also seen a great many athletes, destroy their shins on big plyo boxes, or just totally wipe out trying to jump over a hurdle. That they're being competitive and they're trying to have fun and jump. So keep in mind that your lighter athletes are going to be a little bit safer jumping onto higher surfaces. So in competitions, keep in mind that the further a big athlete falls, it's going to hurt even more than if a lighter athlete falls, and it's going to have a better chance at breaking a bone or straining a muscle or connective tissue. And then also for progressive overload's sake, it may be time to add some type of weight or external resistance. But I would say safety first. Seen some fairly, not really injuries, but just people hurting themselves a little bit with some bloody shins and wipeouts and things like that. And to borrow from Coach Louis Simmons, those big box jumps that people will do where they jump up fairly high, but then they also tuck their knees up to their ears just to get up on a box. That's not really training that triple extension. So your athlete's going to jump, and then as soon as they're done jumping, they're gonna flex their hips to bring their knees up to their chest. They're gonna flex their knees to bring their ankles up to their butt, and they're gonna flex their toes to bring them up as high as they can, so that they can get up on that box, or maybe that box with a couple of plates stacked on top of it. So Louis Simmons says that that's not very practical for athletics, like that activity. And it's kind of, he might use some colorful language, but it's not very practical or safe. But the idea of having athletes compete and jump higher than maybe they've ever jumped before because they're competing and because they're scared, there might be something to that. So that kind of flies in the face of safety first, but it doesn't mean it's a total waste of time. It means there may be some benefits, but always keep in mind your risk versus reward. So for me personally, I would rather just challenge them to maybe go on a jump mat or a vertec and measure their vertical jump versus box jumps with, potentially breaking some bones or sending somebody to hospital. So just some things to think about. Speaking of safety, always teach landing mechanics first. Teaching them to attack the ground. So you can coach like foot slapping so that you can hear their feet smacking. It's probably not necessary. It's one strategy to utilize to make sure that you are getting them to attack the ground. Other coaches might say that you want to be like a ninja and you want to have like have no sound coming from your landings. So it depends on what you're going for and what your philosophy is. But as you're coming down, you basically want that individual at the bottom of their landing to look the same they would as if they had a few 100 pounds on their back for a squat. Have a neutral spine, have your weight back on your heels, eyes forward, hands are down, because having your hands down, it basically prepares you to jump again. So that's my favorite rationale for throwing the hands down on a landing, is that it's preparing you for the next step, which might be to connect jumps together. And then just some simple progressions would be on your jump progression. It's like a base position. So where you want to look when you're landing, and then a drop squat, which you could do from just standing on the floor, a box step off, AKA a depth drop, a box jump. So from low to high. And then why is a box jump going to be put in there at that point? You're adding equipment, you're making it potentially a little bit more risky. But what you're doing is you're removing the eccentric force of landing. So if you think about an individual jumping up and landing down, when you bring that box in, they're going to jump up and they're only going to come down a little bit. So you're reducing their landing forces. So it is an option for a progression. And then after that box jump, you could just do vertical jumps. And after that vertical jump, you would maybe do a hurdle jump, which a hurdle jump would be a progression because now you're adding in implements, you're complicating a little bit, besides just a simple physical act of jumping. And then I won't read through the hop progressions, but feel free to pause it and do so yourself. And then some volume for lower body plyometrics. So this is pulled from and combined from a few resources. And if you'll notice, there's pretty low reps. And I'll remind you that the reps are low because we don't do a great job of growing our phosphagen systems. So for all this powerful, explosive activity that we're going to do, more is not always more. Sometimes less is more. Because with plyometrics, there's a little risk factor. People are jumping around. They can trip over things. They can jump into each other. They can have sloppy landing and hurt themselves. So there's a little bit of a risk factor. You're dealing with the phosphagen system, which takes a while to reload and recharge. So there might be some significant rest times. And you're looking for quality. Once your quality starts dropping off, why would you want to train people to perform plyometrics at a low level or sloppily, basically? So if they're not performing high quality plyometrics in the weight room, how high quality is their movement going to be out on the field or on the court? In the weight room, there's basically no variables or factors. You might have a coach telling you when to jump or reacting to one jump versus a two jump, something along those lines. Whereas out on the court, there's ball bouncing around. You got teammates and opponents, flying around and jumping. So just keep that in mind, is that the session time is about 10 to 15 minutes. And for the reps, you'll do a set and you won't be tired. That's okay. It's not conditioning. It's not work capacity work. It's something different. We are not building our energy system. We are basically streamlining our nervous system. And all that jumping that occurs is definitely related to sport, but it's not. Plyometrics is not just resigned to the lower body and jumping. We have some options here for upper body activities, some med ball dominant activities. On our activity day, I'll bring out, for the upper body, I'll bring out some med ball work, and I'll also bring out a band, and we'll talk through that a little bit more. So that'll be on Plyometrics Activity Day number 2. Some more parameters for medicine ball training. And again, remember, this is plyometric. This is quick. This is violent. This is not to be exhausting. This is not for conditioning or work capacity, unless you want it to be. But just keep in mind that, as we talked about earlier, if you're doing this to a conditioning aspect and just making people sweaty and wearing the breath out of them, you're probably not going to have a direct connection to making them more powerful. You might grow a little bit of muscle, you might help them lose some fat or get leaner, but that's going to be, then you're basically like circumnavigating, and you might end up becoming more powerful, but you're not taking a direct line to becoming more powerful. If you're able to perform some velocity-based training, some equipment would be the Tendo GymAware Elite Form Push Band. And also, one of the best things you can do is just utilize variable resistance with your lifting. So in addition to plyometrics, what you'd also want to do is maybe pay attention to the velocity of your training. So speaking of, or to dive a little bit more into velocity-based training, so if you're using a accelerometer, so something that measures bar speed, it would tell you maybe you're traveling, 0.2 meters per second. And that would be rather slow. That'd be absolute strength. That'd be something like very heavy lifting. And then as your velocity rises and you're moving faster, the weight is probably gonna be lower, but that's all right. Some athletes can lift hundreds of pounds in the weight room, and then all they need to do out on the baseball field is throw something that weighs several ounces. So just kind of depends on your athlete compared to their sport and their needs. And I also like to think about the time for application. Sprinting ground contact time being one of the fastest. Our vertical jump, and what's our slowest one on here? A long jump, take a little bit longer. So everything on here is, think about how quick these are all occurring. That's a shot put delivery is 1/5 of a second. That's incredibly quick. So even though your shot putters tend to be some of your biggest, strongest humans on the planet, they're getting 1/5 of a second to express that strength. And so their rate of force development better be pretty good, or else that big old bench press and squat that they've been developing isn't really going to show up when they're competing or practicing. Again, be thinking of variable resistance. And this is going to naturally, if you don't have a accelerometer or something to measure your velocity, variable resistance, which is essentially going to be chains or bands, or there's some specialty equipment that's made. Variable resistance is going to naturally nurture a faster lifts, because as you're lifting upwards, where normally it gets easy, it's actually going to be harder. So on the squat, when normally we get past sort of that halfway point coming up, it's kind of easy and we can relax. Well, when we have variable resistance, it's actually going to get heavier at the very top. So if you want to do some power training, plyometrics is good, but these are other ways to pursue that power. And I wanted to bring out something that I read in the book, Easy Strength by Dan John and Pavel Tatsulin. It says that a 53-pound kettlebell being swung may provide over 500 pounds of force. So even though doesn't weigh very much, once the physics of it have it moving around at, in semi-awkward positions, the force is going to be greater and our bodies are going to be working and doing something different. So, and again, be thinking about that kettlebell swing. Look at all the eccentric loading of muscles that are then contracted. So when we are standing at the top there, those glutes are contracted because there's hip extension, right? The knees are extended, so the quads are firing. And what's happening over here, the opposite of that. So we are eccentrically loading our agonist muscles. And how are you going to assess that power? You go vertical jump, broad jump, squat test, medicine ball throws. And then for our final slide, I wanted to just sort of circle back to the beginning, is that plyometrics and all this lifting, it really depends on how you want to look at it. It's not all about muscle size or priming the nervous system or taking care of our tendons and our ligaments. It's a connection and a collaboration of all of these things. So we are, as Shrek says, we're like onions. We've got layers. So Donkey says we're like maybe like a parfait, is that we've got layers. But it's, there's physics and there's physiology and there's psychology. So a lot of these, everything is kind of like circling, and it's our job as exercise scientists to grab different components and combine them for success. So that is all we've got for today. Good job, everybody. See you next time. Ooh, we're jumping next time, so bring your tennis shoes.